Welcome to Class Time, your daily classroom for CSEC and CAPE subjects. It is now time for Caribbean Studies. I am Melissa Beckford Simpson. The goal of the lesson is to introduce the subject of Caribbean Studies. We will speak to the nature of the subject, outline of the requirements, and give a brief overview of the exam structure. Now, today we want to introduce Caribbean Studies. And I know you are just getting into more than likely upper sixth form. You are starting out, you have heard of Caribbean Studies, you don't quite know what it is. Well, today is your chance to learn what Caribbean Studies is all about. And I hope that you are excited as I am, as excited as I am to learn about it. All right, so our objectives are very simple for today. We want to define the subject called Caribbean Studies. We want to explain the requirements and the structure of the subject and the exam. And then we're going to locate and define the Caribbean. After all, it's Caribbean Studies we're doing, right? And we want to look at the various definitions of the Caribbean. And then we want to arrive at a very workable definition of the Caribbean. These are the things we aim to do. Now, let's start with the definition of the Caribbean. And you may be saying, but everybody knows how to define the Caribbean. You know, people outside of the region, for example, once they think of the Caribbean, they're thinking of sun, sea, and sand, and letting down their hair, coconut, and, you know, all of these things underneath a coconut tree, feeling relaxed, no problem. But there's a little bit more to the Caribbean than just that. So we want to say that Caribbean Studies, the study of the Caribbean, is a multidisciplinary subject area that draws from history, sociology, geography, economics, amongst many others. And the aim of the subject is to educate the Caribbean student about the region from which he or she originates, while fostering a sense of Caribbean-ness. Students will develop a sense of their roles and responsibilities as Caribbean citizens when there's an understanding of the factors that have shaped the region and the challenges it continues to face in its quest for development. Quite a mouthful there. You are living in the Caribbean, you may be saying, why do I need to learn about Caribbean studies? I'm a Caribbean person. Are you? Are you really? Do you consider yourself to be Caribbean, or do you consider yourself to be Jamaican, Trinidadian, Bajan, whatever it is, right? So it may be that as we go along with Caribbean Studies, you may change some of the ideas that you have, that you think are correct. Now, one of the things I want to start with, I want to put that out there. We don't want anybody ifing and butting about it. Caribbean Studies is a content-based subject, which means that it is a reading subject. And I can hear you from here, moaning already and groaning, oh no. And I can hear some of you screaming and probably you want to tear your hair out already. A reading subject, especially if you are perhaps a science-based person and you're saying, why do I need to do this reading subject? Well, it is a reading subject, and I'm sorry to burst your bubble, right? But I want you to understand that from the get-go, all right? So we've had a long break. We have had many issues, and we know the challenging times that we are in. But guess what? School starts. It's class time. We are ready to begin, and we are ready to get going with the subject. Now, if you think that reading is such a daunting task, especially reading for something like this, and I don't like history, and I don't like sociology, that's why I never chose it. You know, these are the things you're saying, you know, I can hear you saying these things. So you may be saying this, but at the same time, I want to encourage you not to take it on at once, all at once. Take your time, pace yourself. When your teacher does a topic, then just read along with the teacher. Start and just do piece by piece and you will get it. So don't attempt to read all of it at once, all right? So we want you to understand that it is a reading subject and you will need to get that information in. Now, because it's a reading subject does not necessarily mean that we're expecting you to swat the information. We want you to understand the information and then you are able to write what you understand, all right? So let's move along from that. Now, what is the structure and the requirements of the subject area? First of all, it is a fundamental part of your CAPE program. That's why you're doing it. All right? It has 3 modules. Module 1, Caribbean society and culture. Module 2, issues in Caribbean development. And 3, investigating issues in Caribbean development or in the Caribbean. And of course, it has 3 papers. First paper, paper 1, multiple choice, 45 questions coming from both modules 1, 2, and 3, investigating issues. Paper 2 is the essay paper. You get 4 compulsory questions to write, 2 20-mark questions and 2 30-mark questions. Essays that you have to write properly, you have to learn how to structure. As we go along and we do more lessons, I will give you some tips on how you can actually write these essays to get maximum marks. And of course, we have your SBA, the SBA component, all right? It's an independent study. And here's the thing. I want you to see this as a blessing, students. It's worth 40% of your exam grade. Now, you may be saying, but I'm an exam person. But listen, if you can walk into an exam with 40%, then you only have 60% to write for. So that means you can take your time, be guided by your teacher. And we are going to do SBA lessons here and SBA tips. We're going to go through the entire structure of the SBA so you properly understand how to navigate the SBA component. All right, so that is the structure and the requirements of the exam. Now let's get into the lesson itself, locating the Caribbean. All right? And some persons may say, oh, the Caribbean is somewhere between North and South America, you know, and that's enough to locate the Caribbean. But do you know, though, that people in the region, yes, people in the region and people outside of the region don't actually know sometimes where to find the Caribbean. They have heard of it, and they know what the Caribbean is about because they hear of our star athletes. They hear of our food and our ability to communicate and love people, right? They hear of our hospitality. They certainly have heard of our music and entertainment and festivals. They have heard of those things. So they know us for the fun-loving people that we are. But do they really know how to locate and find us? Do you know how to do that and you live in the Caribbean? All right. So it's not as simple to locate and define the Caribbean as it sounds, you know, it's not that simple. The most popular definition that we hear of when you ask people, the average person, perhaps even you who are listening, when you ask, define the Caribbean, locate the Caribbean, you normally say, oh, it is a group of islands that's washed by the Caribbean Sea. Not quite true, not quite so. First thing that is wrong in that sentence is group of islands. The Caribbean is more than islands. There are mainland territories too. All right? And not everywhere in the Caribbean that's considered to be Caribbean is washed by the Caribbean Sea. Not at all. Some washed by the Atlantic Ocean. So we need to revisit that popular, very popular, but very untrue definition of the Caribbean. All right? So when you try to locate the Caribbean just by that, then you're going to have some problems. Let's look at some other ways that we can look at it now. And we're going to point out the anomalies. Anomalies means things that it doesn't work. If you're using this definition, there are too many exceptions. There are too many things that don't fit into it, so it becomes an anomaly. So this definition of the washed by the Caribbean Sea, it does not include Barbados, which is way out in the Atlantic Ocean, and Guyana, which is a mainland country. All right? Belize is also considered to be part of the Caribbean, and it is not quite washed by the Caribbean Sea, right? And there are other areas that are washed by the Caribbean Sea, but are not considered to be part of the Caribbean, such as Mexico and Honduras, those right in the middle there, Panama, Central America. They are washed, but they are not a part of the Caribbean. They are considered to be Latin America, and sometimes the Caribbean is placed within Latin America as well. So let us look at this map, locating and defining using geography. So the first definition that we're trying to use to define the Caribbean is geography, right? Meaning placement, meaning where something can be found. Look at the map carefully, all right? You may be very familiar with the map of the Caribbean. And we are seeing there many areas, some of the areas don't quite fit into the Caribbean, but they are there nonetheless, all right? And we have some kind of relationship with these areas. So we are looking at the Caribbean, Lesser Antilles, Greater Antilles, and so on, all right? So we want to look very carefully and be able. Another way that we can use geography is through lines of latitude and longitude. All right, so we say that using lines of longitude, 60 degrees west to 85 degrees west of the Greenwich Meridian, and for latitude, 5 degrees north to beyond 25 degrees north. Why do we have 5 degrees? Because of where Guyana is located. Sometimes this is extended all the way to 30 degrees north. But 30 degrees north actually takes us into Florida and takes us into Bermuda. And Bermuda is not necessarily considered to be part of the Caribbean. Yes? All right, so what are the anomalies here? The same things we're just pointing out. The lines of latitude and longitude include countries that are not considered to be part of the Caribbean, such as mainland South America. They also go up to the tip of Florida, even at 25 degrees north. There's a part of the tip of Florida that is included. All right? And then when you stretch it as far as to 30 degrees, you really don't get it because Bermuda is included and more of Florida is included. And those are not necessarily considered to be part of the Caribbean. So you see, it's not as easy as you thought it was. All right? Other geographical features include islands, mainland countries. We use those terminology. It's made up of islands and mainland countries. Archipelagos, such as the Lesser Antilles. Bermuda is also an archipelago. Bahamas. So all of those. Water bodies. What are the water bodies that can be found that surround the Caribbean area? The Caribbean Sea, obviously. Atlantic Ocean. Barbados and Guyana are out in the Atlantic Ocean. The Gulf of Mexico. And the Pacific Ocean is in the environs. Not quite, but in the environs. And then we have the sub-regions, Greater Antilles, Lesser Antilles, Windward, Leeward Islands, all right? All of these are terminology that we use when we're talking about defining the Caribbean geographically. Now, trying to be specific in delineating the Caribbean geographically leads us into all kinds of exceptions and anomalies. We have pointed some of those things out. All right? So how do we get to the Caribbean then if this is the case? What do we do next? You may also use another definition of the Caribbean, the geological, right? So when we talk about geology, you know what we're talking about? Geology, rocks. Yes, we're talking about, movements in the earth. So we're basically using plate tectonics, that is movement in terms of seismic and tectonic activities, movements within the earth that help to define the space we call the Caribbean. Tectonic refers to plate movements and seismic refers to movements that affect the surface of the earth, and then those lead to earthquakes and all of that. So the defining feature when we are talking about geology in terms of defining the Caribbean is the Caribbean plate. All right? If you're familiar with plate tectonics, then you'll understand what I mean. The earth is divided into different areas, big chunks. That's the simplest way to explain it. All right? You can't see these because we are on the surface, but they are below the surface. And these chunks, all right, they impact on each other. So that's what we're talking about. And when we're talking about plate movements, they move either in a way that is called transform or divergent or convergent plates, all right? And the Caribbean plate interacts with the South American plate at the bottom and the North American plate, the Cocos plate, the Nazca plate, all of those interact with the Caribbean plate. All right? And so you get from that volcanoes. We know that some parts of the Caribbean are very, very volcanic. We can think right off the bat of St. Lucia and Montserrat and so on. And then we think of earthquakes and mountain building as coming out of this. All right? So there we have. Let's look at this map now. and look at the Caribbean plate. So you can see from this map that the Caribbean plate extends all the way across Central America, and the western tip of it goes over into the Pacific Ocean. So all of that area. Note, though, that the Caribbean plate does not include Cuba. Note it passes right below Cuba. And it does not include, of course, the Bahamas and those areas going all the way up. So, but it does include the other areas of the Greater Antilles and the Lesser Antilles. And notice that it includes Central America. So all of those areas we took out before in our first definition. The Mexico and the Honduras and the Panama, those are now included in this Caribbean plate that we're using to define the Caribbean space. So is the geology definition a good definition of the Caribbean? What do we think? Here we're looking at it much more clearly, and we're seeing how the plate interacts with the other plates. You have there the South American Caucasus, North American plate, and so on. But does it adequately, based on all the things we've been talking about and how we have been approaching the first definition with the anomalies and the exceptions, does the geology definition, does it adequately define the Caribbean? What do you say? I can hear you, I can hear you trying to decide whether or not you're going to settle with that one. But there are the anomalies, as we have been pointing out. The western edge goes over into the Pacific Ocean. The definition does not include Bahamas, Guyana, and Cuba. And the average individual, if you're going to use this definition to talk about the Caribbean, and you're speaking to somebody who knows nothing about the Caribbean, and you say, oh, geology, we're going to use geology, and the Caribbean plate, and so on. Does the average individual know about using plates and plate tectonics to define anywhere? When people want to define somewhere, when people want to find somewhere, that's not the first thing that they think about. They begin to think about the people. They begin to think of what do they know that is produced from this area. Right? I think you're already beginning to get a sense of where I'm going and what I am thinking of as a proper definition of the Caribbean. But let's move along. Now we have a political definition of the Caribbean. I know you must be wondering, so how much definition there? How much definition we're going to go through? But there are other definitions, such as the political definition. Now, when we talk about political, we're talking about governance, structure, and that kind of thing. The Caribbean is not a single political entity. In other words, you cannot group us all together and say the Caribbean and we are one political nation. And we all vote for one president or prime minister or whatever it may be. No, that is not the case. The Caribbean is a myriad of different islands, mainland territories, and so on. And they all have different political happenings. All right? So it's a mixture. Generally speaking, the Caribbean islands, mainland territories, we are all products, in a sense, of the colonization of European powers. So we have been heavily impacted by the European powers. What are these European powers? You know this from first form man, first form history, even primary school, you know this answer. Yes, I can hear you. We're talking about the British, the French, the Dutch, the Spanish. I don't know why I call the Spanish last, and the Spanish would have been the first of the Europeans to come. Yes, but the Spanish too. Now, we also use CARICOM as a kind of identifying feature, right? Because CARICOM is a unifying element in the Caribbean, but not all countries that are considered to be part of the Caribbean are part of CARICOM either, right? Though we use CARICOM largely to talk about and try to define the areas of the Caribbean. All right, let us move along and see if we can find out some more about this political definition. First, we have independent states. Remember I said it's a number of different states in different stages of political development. So you have independent states. Haiti, Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, Belize, Guyana, St. Lucia, Grenada, and so many others are independent states. Notice that most of the ones that I've named are actually what we call Anglophone. Anglophone. And the terminology refers to those areas that were colonized by the British. There are some Francophone areas too, such as Haiti, right? Haiti was first colonized by the French. Now we're going to get to the case of Haiti in just a second. We're going to look into Haiti just a little bit. But while these countries are independent, we cannot say they're all independent, right? There is still a difference in how they are independent because they are run differently. Take, for example, Cuba. Cuba is a communist country. It is an independent country, but it is a communist country, which means that its governance structure and its economic structure too is different from what you would find in other parts of the Caribbean. All right? Now, in a communist country, it is state-run. It means that all the resources of the country are used for the benefit of everybody and more or less equitably distributed. So that's what Cuba is about. All right? So there's no democracy. You don't go to vote. You don't go to elect a member of parliament. There's a one-party system in a communist government. All right? Now you have republics. Trinidad, Guyana are republics, and you have two other republics. You begin to think about those two other republics and tell me at the end of the lesson what those two republics are. But for now, we'll go with Trinidad and Guyana. How is this different? How is this different from the other category that we have there, a constitutional monarchy, such as what exists in your country? Yes, Jamaica. We have a constitutional monarchy. It is a democratic, independent country, but it is a constitutional monarchy, which is different from a republic. Simply put, and it's much more complicated than this simple answer, but just for us to easily understand. In a republic, yes, was once colonized by a European country, in the context of the Caribbean, but at the same time, the republic has removed the monarch as the head of state. So, yes, there's been a lot of talk recently in the news about us focusing on removing the Queen as head of state for Jamaica. What purpose she serve? Why are we giving allegiance to the Queen just the same? The reason why we're still doing it is because we have not had the political will to change it. All right? So Trinidad and Guyana has changed it. What have they done? They have removed the Queen as head of state and they have replaced the Queen with a president. So the president is now the head of state. Mind you, they still have a prime minister and a parliament, and the prime minister is still the head of government, but the president is the head of state. Now, this may be a little bit different from other republics outside of the region, such as the United States, right? So, and in a constitutional monarchy, obviously, we have still retained the Queen, and the representative of the Queen in Jamaica is the Governor General, all right? But they're all independent states. What are some other aspects of the political definition that we can think about? Non-independent states. And notice I said non-independent. I didn't say dependent. I said non. Because they are in various stages and it's a little bit complicated. So let's go with the first one. Plebiscite. Unincorporated territory. Associated state. Those words are used interchangeably. As in the case of Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. No, they're not colonies. Neither are they independent. They have what is called internal self-government. So they are able to run their own show, more or less, right? They are attached to the United States, but these individuals are not citizens of the United States. So they can't just go to the United States and vote in the upcoming election. By the way, are you paying attention to those debates? Very, very, very comical, aren't they? So they can't just fly over and go and say, okay, we're coming to vote. It doesn't work that way. They pretty much have to go through the same rigors as any other Caribbean person wants to become a U.S. citizen. All right? And then you have dependencies, such as those of the French and the British. All right, and I've broken down those dependencies into two different things. So you have the French departments. So in the French, they call it departments. And why I've broken them down is because with the French, we're talking about Guadeloupe, Martinique, Cayenne, which was once French Guyana. These areas are what we call departments. So they are not independent, but they are not colonies. And these people are fully citizens of France. Very different from the case with Puerto Rico and the United States. They are fully citizens. So these areas are treated as just overseas territories of France. All right? And then the British dependencies now, British Virgin Islands, Montserrat, Cayman Islands, Bermuda, Turks and Caicos Islands, they are not independent. They do not enjoy any of the political privileges with Britain. So for all intents and purposes, they are, we could still call them colonies. Yes. I bet you thought that we didn't have any such thing anymore. Bet you thought that. All right? Then we have dependent states now, and I've made sure to categorize them very differently. We're moving quickly along. The Netherlands Antilles, Curacao, Bonaire, Saba, St. Eustatius. So these are Dutch-owned areas. All right? And part of an island, which the Dutch call Saint Martin. These territories are directly run by the Dutch government, and the Dutch monarch is the head of state, and their prime minister is the prime minister of the Dutch. There's no prime minister, all right? So they have a governor who is appointed by the Dutch to handle the affairs in these countries. Now, Suriname, also considered to be part of the Caribbean, yes, Suriname belonged to this group because Suriname was owned by the Dutch, or colonized by the Dutch. Let me be politically correct and say colonized by the Dutch. But they are now independent, so they don't fall into this bracket. All right, so let's look at the case of Haiti. I promised you that we'd look at the case of Haiti. It was the first independent black republic, and they received this status, prestigious status, but now dubious as well. They received this status after fighting from 1791 to 1804 for their independence. So yes, they took up arms, they overthrew the entire slave system, declared themselves independent. So what's the problem? What's the problem? It is an independent state. It is. But the operations of Haiti since then, it has had a history, a turbulent history of political upheaval, coup d'etat, and all kinds of things. And it has left Haiti in a very dependent state, even though it is an independent state. So it is a member of CARICOM, but it is economically unstable. And from time to time, different countries, including the US, have come in and they have taken over affairs. Sometimes it is CARICOM that has taken over affairs there to help to administer. So Haiti is an independent country, but it is having several issues in terms of economic independence. It is not able to stand on its own. And some of this has to do with what happened after the revolution. They were asked to do so many things, pay back a lot of money to France, 100 million francs. They were cut off from the rest of the world. And in a sense, they have not really recovered from that. Not to mention the series of political plunderers who have taken all that it has, including its natural resources. So Haiti is, in fact, an independent state, but it is a struggling independent state. All right? So we mentioned CARICOM, and we spoke about how CARICOM is important in putting all of these things together, in contributing to the Caribbean being a kind of unified force to some extent. And in subsequent lessons, we're going to talk more. We're going to challenge what CARICOM has been able to achieve. All right? So CARICOM is a very important, very, very important member state. Let's look at this definition very quickly. We're going to go through this one very quickly. We're using the diasporic definition. And we're talking about Caribbean people who live in other parts of the world, right? And I think you should know that there are more Caribbean people who live outside of the region than those who live within the region. So we're talking about the United States, in Florida, New York, Britain, Canada, now China and Japan. Yes, we have a lot of Caribbean people who go there now, working as exchange or in work programs, teachers, all right? Now, there's a little case here that I have extracted of Notting Hill, and this is a carnival that takes place every year. Pockets of Caribbean people who live in this space come together and create a carnival, just like if they were at home, all right? So we see them there celebrating, gallivanting, all right? And I just want us to take a couple seconds to just listen to this little, watch this little video and to just listen to the things that are coming out when we talk about the Caribbean. And we'll hear what people think about the Caribbean, even from within the Caribbean. Yes, wave on a flag. Then were you dancing? I was dancing. Wave on a flag. All right, so this takes us right into the final definition. And we're going to have to go through very quickly. All right? No matter where you come from, you hear those things coming out in the song? Yes. So what could that mean? We're talking about Caribbean people. Yes. That goes right into our historical definition of the Caribbean. And can you tell that this is the part I love the most? I know you can tell it's the part I love the most. So the historical definition of the Caribbean acknowledges the shared history of the Caribbean territories and their experiences with migration. Migration. You hear she say, Sugar say, no matter where you come from. So we're talking about migration because the Caribbean is essentially a place made up of migrated peoples from different parts of the world. So we have migration as a defining feature. We're talking about the historical definition. We have colonization, enslavement, resistance. We could talk about the struggle for enfranchisement and independence. We could also use the plantation as a defining feature because the plantation was a very important part of why some people were here in the first place or how some of us came to be here in the first place. So the historical definition, extremely important, and it covers so many things because it talks about our experiences as a people. All right, so we'll talk about the migrations now. The first grouping of people we're talking about are the indigenous peoples, right? They also migrated here. They didn't originate here. They were originally from Asia. Their ancestors were originally from Asia. And they crossed during the last ice age to come to North America, Central America, South America, and eventually into the Caribbean space, the Caribbean region. All right, so we're talking about the Taino, which were mainly found in the Greater Antilles, the Kalinago in the Lesser Antilles, and the Maya in Belize. First groupings of migrations. Then we have the whites. Of course, the famous or infamous Christopher Columbus and what he did there, all right? And the British, French, of course, it would have been the Spanish first. Then the British, French, Dutch, Danish, Scottish, Irish, Welsh, you name it. They are here. We're also talking about the forced migration of millions of Africans out of West Africa from places like Dahomey, Oyo, Benin. Those were the areas, the Ghana area, who were transported here, forcibly transported here. And then, of course, after slavery ended, we're talking about indentured workers who were brought here to work. Chinese mainly, Indians, Madeirans, Syrians, Javanese, all kinds of groups of people were brought here, but some in more numbers than others. Mainly, the Chinese and Indians were in Trinidad, came to Trinidad, Guyana, and Jamaica. All right? So these are groupings of Chinese on one side and Indians on the other side who have come to the Caribbean, who have migrated to the Caribbean. And they had certain push factors that caused them to come here, things that were happening in their own country. They were looking for betterment. Isn't that usually the reason why people leave where they are? Now, this shared history of enslavement and colonialism is perhaps a more inclusive Caribbean than any other. So this is where we were going. This is where we were getting. Because regardless of the region, regardless of the area, Windward, Leeward, Lesser Antilles, Greater Antilles, regardless, there is that shared experience of the plantation system, enslavement, and resistance that comes with it. All right? So this has helped to foster a kind of affinity in the Caribbean. And there we have some images of how the transportation took place across to come to the Caribbean in terms of the blacks. Now, let us look at this comprehensive, inclusive definition. Let's put all of those things together. The geography, the geology, the political, everything. And let us see if we can arrive at one definition. This is my version. You can come up with your own. The Caribbean is a melting pot of islands and mainland territories at various stages of independence and development, lying approximately between 5 degrees and 25 degrees north of the equator, 60 degrees and 85 degrees west of the Greenwich Meridian, generally sharing a history of migration, colonialism, enslavement, and resistance. Do you see what I did there? Yes, I incorporated all of those definitions, an element of all of those definitions. Perhaps only the diasporic definition is not there. An element was included of all of them, and this is what we have come up with. All right? So, how Caribbean do you feel? You can discuss that at home. You can talk about it at home. How Caribbean do you feel? So we have defined the Caribbean as a space. How do you feel? Do you feel Caribbean or do you feel Jamaican? Do you feel Trinidadian? How do you feel? Do you feel that you're part of this grouping that we have just defined, that we have just located, that we have just named? Even though we have the shared experiences, do you feel that you are an integral part of this Caribbean? And we're going to explore all of these issues in subsequent lessons, all right? Now, very quickly, I just want to put a past paper question out there. Describe what is meant by having a Caribbean identity and show how and why that concept varies from place to place within the Caribbean and its diaspora. Yes, quite a question to think about. So you're gonna first of all have to think about what it means to be Caribbean. What is this Caribbean identity that we're talking about? And how do people feel about it? How does it vary if you go from one Caribbean island or Caribbean place to another? Do the lesser Antilles feel the same way as us? Do they? So this is what you want to explore when you're examining this question. All right? So we have been able to cover a number of things. We have been able to cover the full gamut of all the definitions of the Caribbean. In subsequent classes, we are going to go further into the history of the Caribbean historical process. That's what we intend to do next, to look in detail at the historical process so we can have a greater sense of how this process helps to shape, locate, and define the Caribbean. That's what we will do next time. So, this was your lesson for today. We have done Cape Caribbean studies. We have been able to cover all of the things that I've just named. And that's the time we have for Caribbean studies.